Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit. I would like to share some thoughts about planning for this episode, but before I get into it, as I was sitting down here and as I pressed record, I had this intuition intuitive knowing that tells me to really connect with the energy and the spirit of this podcast. And I just started bawling. I just started crying because the spirit of this podcast feels so welcoming to me. It's truly the most favorite project that I've ever created. And I feel emotional saying that. And I want to share that with all of you because I know that this podcast is in transition and it's shifting in its format, and I imagine that at least for some of you that may have some sort of impact. So if you are still listening to this podcast, thank you. I really appreciate your presence. I feel like this podcast is both my art and my service. And yeah, it just feels really meaningful to be here with all of you. So thank you. Thank you. All right, we gotta begin with the Pisces stuff before we get to the Virgo stuff. So specifically in this episode, I would like to explore when I have found planning to be helpful and when I have found planning to be either detrimental to my process, or when I unknowingly use planning to perhaps avoid addressing a deeper underlying issue. So what I really want to focus on is to explore the underlying energetics behind creative, intentional, and life-giving planning. I'm not talking about planning that feels forced. I don't have any interest in planning that makes us feel stuck. I want to engage in planning that actually assists us in getting closer, getting deeper to our soul work in ways that actually feel good and in ways that actually help us maybe even use our energy a little bit more efficiently. Right? So that we have more space to enjoy all that life has to offer us while still being tethered and devoted to our purpose. There are so many books and courses out there dedicated to the topic of planning. And what I've noticed is that many of these resources have such incredible frameworks that they're sharing around how to plan, right? The different techniques, the different logic, and the philosophies maybe even behind planning. But what I often find to be missing in the conversations around planning is what I believe to be the most essential piece, which is the humanity of the person, right? And the truth that is the energetic of the truth that runs through the projects that we are planning around, right? The books, the music, the podcast, the courses that we want to create, right? The thing that's really coming up and out of us to be shared as our larger gift to the world. What I found in my own personal journey and in my own experimentation with planning as well as my work with clients, is the importance of understanding why we engage in planning, right? And to really not just understand it on a brain level, but to understand it on an embodied level, on a spirit level, and to really connect with that purpose, right? And when we connect with that sense of purpose, then we can have a better idea about how to plan and when we should be planning versus when we should refrain from planning. Planning is ultimately a tool, and so planning, in my opinion, should really be treated as one among many other tools in your kit. The analogy we can use here is the hammer. If you need to hang a painting on the wall, chances are you need a hammer and a nail, right? So you can hang that painting. And you need to know exactly how to use that hammer and how that hammer should be hitting the nail in order to create the right hole in the wall, right? And create the right condition to allow your painting to be hung. But if you're trying to eat a soup, for example, your hammer is not going to do you much good. And in understanding the features of the hammer and having a relationship with the hammer, you get to know how to use it and when to use it and when not to use it. The more we understand how planning can serve us on a general level, the more we can understand when not to plan. It's also equally important to understand our own tendencies when it comes to planning. The more we understand ourselves and the reasons why we plan, the more we understand all the ways that maybe we can use planning to get us further from the work or get us further from directions that are welling up from within us that can help us do the work in a way that feels exciting and feels authentic to us, the more we can more effectively and efficiently use planning to assist us and to support us in our creative process rather than feeling burdened by this sense that you should be planning, right? Or that you're imprisoned by the rigidity of your own plans, or that maybe you feel disappointed that you're not following your own carefully laid out plans. So for those of you who are interested in the astrological context around creating and sharing this episode at this particular time, this is one of the themes that feel important to bring to our attention at this time. Mercury just stationed retrograde in Virgo as of the time that I'm sharing this episode, and it will crawl back into Leo until August 21st, 2024, when it's going to station direct, and Mercury won't be re-entering Virgo until halfway through Virgo season, precisely on September 9th. Planning as a concept is very Virgo. Planning is very mercurial, right? And also, I would like to bring in the energy and the spirit of Leo as well. I would like to invoke this connection between Virgo and Mercury and Leo and the Sun. The act of planning that is devoid of centering our hearts and what truly matter to us is always going to feel hollow. Artful planning helps us live a more authentic life, one where we get to align our interests and our efforts, right? Planning with the heart can help create this alchemy, this magic, where what is resonating uniquely with you and what is in affinity with your soul's desires can be brought using your efforts and using your body into the physical plane. So I'd like to begin by sharing a little bit of a personal background and my own personal relationship with planning. Internal and external struggles around planning show up a lot throughout my creative and my mystical journeys. It's kind of a large topic for me. As some of you may know, I'm a Virgo rising, so it feels like my path is always bringing me back to some of these lessons and some of the awareness around what it means to plan and how much to plan and the right way to plan or the wrong way to plan or even just what feels good when it comes to planning and what doesn't feel good. I remember, this is quite a humorous example. There was this one trip to Japan, probably about a year and a half ago, where I literally spent like half of my time in Tokyo going to different stationery stores trying to find a perfect planner. This is a true story. So yeah, I've always kind of had this really intense relationship with planning. And in some ways, this quest to deeply understand the intricacies of using planning as a tool in my life has been a huge search. It has been a huge exploration in my own personal process. I've gone through periods where I obsessively planned everything, and I've gone through periods where I completely and utterly rebelled against any kind of planning whatsoever. So last month, when I reached out to folks and asking folks to submit questions that they would like me to speak to, I chuckled when I read this question that's submitted by Tiffy, who is at Tiffography on Threads. And I just kind of marveled at how I haven't talked about this topic on the podcast so far, because it's such a huge part of my journey, and I feel like Tiffy was really onto something when she asked about this question. So here is Tiffy's question. As an artist, is the energetic authenticity of your work compromised or enhanced by planning? Can spontaneous, unplanned creation yield a more energetically true piece, or does planning allow for a more refined output? Asking as an art enthusiast, Virgo rising. So if you're listening, hello Tiffy, and a huge thank you for this incredible question. So I just want to begin by sharing something that might seem obvious to a lot of other people, but was not obvious to me. Like, I really had to learn this the hard way, and is sometimes still not obvious when I'm in periods of deep confusion about my own path or about my own self, about what the point of my work is, which is that there's no one right way to plan. There are many different ways to plan, and there are many degrees of intensity and precision when it comes to planning. Planning is not really a binary, where it's like we either plan this out or be totally spontaneous, right? There's actually a huge range with regards to how we can plan. So I just want to begin here because I feel like it's going to clear up some of the potential binary thinking that we can kind of start to fall into when we think about planning, right? Let's take podcasting as an example. You can plan out a whole year of podcast episodes and then maybe bang out the process of writing and recording all of your episodes within the month of August, and then just let the content be schedule released throughout the year, right? That is probably a very efficient and aligned way to create a podcast for some people, and for others, that might be your worst nightmare. But in any case, that is something that you absolutely can do, right? If you are a creator of some sort, you can just plan out all of the things that you want to share for as long as you want into the future, right? You can also take the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of approaching the planning, which is never planning anything out and basically just start on working anything you want to share whenever your heart tells you to, right? Between the two extremes of totally planning it out and totally not planning it out, there are many different options. For example, I noticed that through the month of July, even though I'm no longer releasing the Monday contemplations for the week ahead, which I used to do for almost 2 years, I'm still feeling this desire to share a podcast every Monday. And the reason why I know that is because it's almost like my body has this clock now. By around Friday or Saturday, I feel this itch to create something for the podcast. Like, I want to share my thoughts, I want to share some of my experiences, and I really want to tune into what would be helpful for those who are still listening to this podcast. So planning has many different shapes and many different faces, right? Let's say, as an example, you're writing a novel. You can plan out each and every chapter of the novel. You can wait to actually write the novel until you have the full arc of the plot in your mind and the exact pathway that it's going to take you to get from the start to the finish line, right? Or you can be the kind of writer who makes the plan to simply wake up every morning and go to your writing desk and then write 500 words on your novel, regardless of the quality of what you write, right? And maybe that's kind of part of your process. Maybe part of the planning is to allow whatever wants to emerge to come with the ebbs and flows of your daily reality. Even though the second plan of action sounds extremely loose, it's still planning, right? You're essentially still relying on the planned structure of writing every single day. And I think it's important for us to remember that there's just no better way to plan. Like sometimes, depending on the project and depending on the person doing it, the carefully laid out plan might be totally appropriate. And then maybe even for the same writer, a different project might call for a different way of planning around things. So I've noticed that there are different types of people in the world. Some people really thrive on having structure, right? Maybe having very clear and rigid structures. And for some other people, a more loose structure is necessary. And then for others, the only structure they may need is the freedom to do whatever they want to do when they want to do it, right? Which is also a structure. It's a very loose structure, but it's structure nonetheless. So one solution that I want to propose here, and this is going to be probably the only explicitly practical piece of advice that I'm going to be sharing here, is to consider that one way to use planning to enhance the authenticity of our work and the authenticity that runs through our process is to create a plan that honors the truth of who you are at any given moment, while also honoring the long-term goal that you have. So one thing that can be challenging about the human experience is this duality, right? We often have this intuitive knowing or this deep desire to do something. Many of us have a sense of purpose, this little voice or perhaps big voice inside of us that says, this is why I'm alive on this earth. My soul came into my body so that I can write a book, or so that I can be a world-class performer, or so I can help play my part in the collective healing process, or to facilitate justice to be enacted in the supply chain of food system in the world, right? Whatever your purpose is. Many of us come into this world with a felt sense of that purpose, even if the form of it may shift over time and depending on circumstances. On the other hand, we also have the experience of a fluctuating moment by moment or maybe chapter by chapter experience of, but my body is not feeling great today. I don't want to write. Or maybe I can't really focus on my mission work because the balance in my bank account is running low and I need to add more hours to work my day job so I can pay my bills, right? These are all very normal part of the human experience. There's that tension between longer term goal and shorter term needs. And so I feel like it's really important to listen to our authentic truth in any given moment while also continuing to press forward, to move the needles toward that which we really care about. In one-on-one sessions that I do and in the classes that I facilitate, I often get asked this question of, essentially, how do I maintain consistency in working towards a bigger goal while also tending to my day-to-day needs? And my favorite answer to this question is to make a commitment to yourself to always allow yourself to work on your bigger goal whenever you feel like it. So let me explain this a little bit more. For example, in the case of writing a book, one way to have a plan in terms of writing your book is to create a rigid schedule, right? Similar to what I was saying earlier, either you have the schedule of this is how the novel is going to unfold, I'm just going to execute this plan, or maybe you have a rigid schedule of every 9 a.m. I wake up and I work on the thing no matter what, right? But another way to plan it out is to make a commitment to really, really listen to your body and your spirit, and especially tune into when your body and your spirit really want to work on the thing that's important to you. And then to actually follow that impulse to create. In other words, can you give yourself permission to work on whatever it is that you want to work on anytime you feel like working on it? Even if the timing seems a little inconvenient, like maybe you're in the middle of family vacation, you can always take out your phone or your notes app and you can start writing there, right? You can work on some piece of your mission work whenever, wherever, and giving yourself full permission to do so might be really, really powerful. And that's one way of planning, right? You can create a plan to always work on something that you really care about when you feel like it, essentially. That impulse to create, especially if it's in alignment with our hearts and with our purpose and with our soul, is usually not super loud. And I think this is where things get a little tricky, right? The other day, a student in my current container, Sophia, reminded me of something that Lindsay Mack repeatedly says, which is that our intuition often speaks to us in a whisper rather than this loud booming voice. It's reminding me of one of my favorite quotes from Bayo Akomolafe, which is, I think he said this during a conversation with Sophie Strand. I'll try to find the conversation and link it in the show notes if I could find it. But he said, the sacred is the amniotic incompleteness of things. The idea that the world is never fully captured, never fully legible or intelligible. And that this idea of the sacred is fugitive. Maybe God's whisper when we expect the thunder or the lightning from the top of the mountain. I mean, it's so beautiful and so poetic, right? One way to plan in a way that alchemizes your more logical and analytical and structural part, as well as your more intuitive and more attuned part, one way to really marry logic and mystery is to commit to working on what really matters to your heart when your intuition and your body tells you to do it. To commit to listening to that voice that Bayo calls God's whisper, no matter the time of day or no matter what else you have going on. I think the heart of authentic planning has more to do with getting out of our own way. We tend to hold on to stories about whether we deserve to do something or not, or stories around how there's a right way or a correct way to do something. Something that I've noticed from talking to a lot of creatives over the years is that oftentimes one's journey only seems to make sense on the other end of that journey, right? Once the journey is said and done, then it feels like, okay, I can go back to that story and I can tell you how I got from A to B and then from B to C, right? And at the end of the day, everything seems to make sense. But the reality is, when we're facing the unknown of our creative work, when we're facing the unknown of our soul work, often there is no right way to plan, because we're just saying yes to each step of getting closer into that dark forest, right? Or inside that dark forest. There's no way to fully know exactly how everything's going to play out. Authentic planning then has more to do with giving yourself a spacious enough structure so that you feel safe to receive any information that might come through around the bigger picture, should it choose to come to you. Sometimes with certain projects, you never see the bigger picture until you're done with the thing. And that the structure can also help you feel safe to fully support yourself in following your intuitive knowing, which is often illogical and strange and less grand than your ego seems to think, and perhaps even, as I mentioned, inconvenient. Self-knowledge, especially based on some of our prior experiences, can also really help us when it comes to deciding how much planning we want to do for our endeavors. So what I've noticed, for example, for myself, is that depending on the topic and depending on my mood, when I record the podcast, for example, or when I'm teaching a class, there are times when I really need a tight structure, when I need to really plan out what are we going to do, how long are we going to do it for, what exactly are we going to be talking about. And sometimes there can be this preconceived notion that planning somehow makes it less exciting. And as a classical pianist, as someone who's trained in classical music in general, I find this to be such a huge fallacy. If you've ever watched classical musicians play, especially like a really great performance of classical music, you will see that this is not true, because clearly the piece that usually these players perform are way too complicated in order to be able to sight read on the spot, right? There is a certain level of preparation. Sometimes that preparation takes years in order to be able to really be in the flow of the music. And so I think it's important to fully acknowledge if we are the kind of person who needs a little bit of planning in order to be able to really enjoy ourselves in the moment, right? While at the same time not relying on planning as a crutch, because there can also be instances where we feel like unless I plan and unless I practice this, I beat this preparation thing to death, I will not be able to do the thing, right? And I think finding the right balance between the right amount of preparation, the right amount of structure, and over preparation or overly structured to the point of rigidity is a really exciting process that probably is kind of an ongoing thing, right? You'll probably always be trying to figure it out. But I think we can have a baseline sense of, am I the kind of person who needs a little bit of planning, or medium amount of planning, or a lot of planning, right? And something that I have recently been playing with is this idea that when I plan, I can also bring in creativity into my planning, right? I can plan by creating ample space in my schedule, in my process, so that I can create multiple different drafts of whatever it is that I'm creating. And chances are my fifth or my sixth draft is going to be much better than my first draft, right? And this is, unfortunately, I found this to be true. There is a part of me that would like to just be that spontaneous person, but maybe it's just my personality, but I found that that's just not totally true for me. That a certain level of preparation actually gives me peace of mind that then allows me to be really spontaneous and really exciting and truly, truly present. So I found that planning and preparation is my best friend, and also at the same time, with certain topics, I don't have to prepare myself to death because perhaps it's already an integrated part of my being, right? So you can trust yourself while also using the magic of planning to further enhance your ability to be present in the moment. So now I want to address something that Tiffy mentioned here, which is, are there times when planning actually compromises the authenticity of the work? This is such a delicious part of the question, in my opinion. There are a few categories of instances where I've noticed my planning being detrimental to the authenticity of my work, or at the very least, planning can block out the authentic energy that wants to flow through the process, right? Maybe the result itself will feel deeply authentic, but sometimes the process feels a little bit forced. And so here are some of the things that I've noticed over the years of my own planning and watching other people plan. The first one is being overly rigid with your plans. When we create no space for improvisation, for surprises, for mystery to kind of come in during the creative process, that in some ways is not honoring life, because life comes with change, right? Changes are one of the constants of being alive. Unexpected surprises are often what makes the work fun, right? And so when we're in our planning mode, and perhaps some of this comes from conditioning, we can think that good planning looks like this airtight container. But rather, what I've found over the years is that the more mental space and the more actual space in the calendar you book in, or that you give space to for shifts, for mystery, the more exciting the process becomes. So that's something to consider. The second thing, or the second category of instance where planning can be detrimental, is downright creating plans that are completely unrealistic, right? Unrealistic planning can look like planning based on fantasies, right? Or based on shoulds, essentially ideas of how you should be working rather than reality of your life. So what this can look like is, for example, if you know you're not the kind of person who can wake up at 6 a.m. in the morning, and you decide to bake into your plan this plan to work, to wake up at 6 a.m. in the morning and to work on your creative project every day, chances are, unless you are someone with a really strong willpower, or there's a very strong motivation to make you do the thing, you're not going to be able to do the thing, because it's not just who you are. I would recommend really grounding into who you are and how you live your life, how you're already living your life, how you're already working on your creative project, right? Even if it's not 100% to your ideal satisfaction, first you might want to really slow down, right, before getting too excited when you're creating the plan, and to do an honest assessment of how many functional hours do you actually have to dedicate to the thing. If you have a day job, or if you have family that you need to take care of, or if you have some type of work that you need to do in order to pay the bills, you need to be very clear and very, very honest with yourself with regards to how much energy do I have to actually devote to this thing that I really care about. And it may be important to create some buffers, because you may also need time and space to really get into the work. Especially in the beginning, I would say, the first 3 or 4 weeks of starting some new habit, usually it's a little bit challenging, right? And so you might have to book in some time to just devote yourself to whatever it is that you want to do, and not let yourself feel like a failure when nothing's really happening. I think one of the biggest challenges is that we can pull out a little too early. We can feel derailed, or we can feel disappointed when we're not seeing the progress that we are hoping for, or that we were planning for. And usually the problem is in the planning. The problem is not in the progress itself, because it's very likely that our idea about how the work should unfold actually doesn't really match with the reality of how the work wants to unfold, right? And then another example or another garden variety of creating unrealistic plans is a very specific variety, which is running other people's energies in our system. So what I mean by that is perhaps you have this person, maybe this semi-public figure or this teacher or this coach or this YouTube personality or this really famous person that you've elected in your mind and in your imagination as a highly creative person, a highly productive person, and a very organized person, right? And then you can create all these stories about like, oh, this person must be successful or must be creative and inspired because they do XYZ, right? And maybe you even read that in one of the interviews that they did. Spoiler alert, this is something that I've done a lot in my life. I love reading about other people's creative process, and I like to just almost like take in other people's strategies into my own life, just to try it on for size, right? Which I think is a pretty intelligent strategy. I think that's really fun and that can be really cool. But what I've always found is that at the end of the day, the focus or the point isn't to follow other people's strategies, right? Is not to run your energy like Taylor Swift, or whoever it is that you like, right? Oprah Winfrey, or I'm coming up with some of the worst examples here, but I think you get the gist, right? The point is not to design your life to look like them in order to reverse engineer their success. The point is to let yourself be inspired by them and to see, when do I actually feel like I can do what's authentic for me? So for example, I'm going to give you a very concrete example to explain this a little bit further. There was a point where, for me, for example, I really admired certain pianists. This was back in the days when I was training to be a classical pianist. And so I would read up all these interviews about how they practice, or how they use their time, how many hours a day they practice. And what I found is it's sometimes helpful for me to maybe set aside 2 or 3 months to actually implement those strategies. But in the process of implementing those strategies, I start to find my own wisdom, my own body telling me, this feels really good. I really like doing it this way. But this doesn't feel that great. Like this other aspect, we're just going to spit it out, right? And sometimes we can get into a battle within ourselves of like, well, but if Taylor Swift does X, Y, Z, I should also be able to do that, right? And what I would say to that is, not really, right? Because chances are you are a very different person than Taylor Swift, and so the point is not to be like Taylor Swift, but the point is to allow yourself to be inspired by another person's process, another creator's process, and to try it out for size, just so you have a template, just so you have something to bump up against, right? Something to give you a little bit of feedback of like, oh, this is interesting. I kind of like this sensation, or I kind of like this way of approaching this. But does this feel really true for me in the moment is ultimately the real question. And finally, the third category of instances where planning can become problematic is when we use planning to avoid doing the thing that we actually want to do. So again, this is something I know very well from my own personal life and my own process. Sometimes the act of planning makes us feel like we're already doing the thing. There's this pretty well-known research that I read once that the brain basically registers talking about doing the thing as doing the thing itself. We can trick ourselves into feeling the satisfaction of doing the thing just from planning it, right? This is, in my opinion, very dangerous because even though we may feel temporary satisfaction, the thing we really want to do is the thing itself. What we really want to do is to write the book, to create the podcast, to record the music, to launch the course. It's not really the planning that is satisfying to us. We need to continue to remember that the primary purpose of the planning is to support us in doing the thing, right? The planning is only useful insofar as it helps us do the thing a little bit more efficiently. If we can use a little bit less brain power to consistently reorient and try to figure out what to do next, and rather already have a step-by-step thing, regardless of whether we decide to follow the step-by-step instruction or not, it relieves us of some of the mental pressures that we can feel around needing to figure out the next thing to do, right? And it can free up brain space so that we can actually be creative. We can be intuitive. This is something that I've been really learning in a really deep way from one of my teachers, Michelle Pelizon of Holisticism, that the right structure for us will help us feel less cluttered in our mind, less cluttered in our brain, so that we can actually start doing the thing. That we can spend our energy, our precious life force energy, being inspired, right? Thinking creative thoughts, thinking outside of the box. So when planning starts to feel like escapism in our bodies, right? Usually for me, it kind of feels like, oh, this plan is probably good enough, but somehow like, let me just tweak it a little bit more. Let me make it more perfect, right? And chances are, it probably is a distraction if it starts to feel like escapism. So I just want to note that, these three categories, right? The first one being overly rigid with our plans, the second one being creating unrealistic plans, and the third one using planning to avoid doing the thing you actually want to do. There are sometimes instances where more than one of these categories are happening, right? Sometimes we can be overly rigid with our planning because our subconscious is actually afraid, because we don't want to take the risk. In other words, your rigidity or your orientation towards rigidity may be a symptom of something deeper lurking underneath, which is that maybe you're afraid. Maybe your subconscious doesn't know what to do with that fear. Just being aware of that can be so helpful in your creative process. Now, one caveat I will share here is to be mindful of any tendencies to be perfectionistic or to be puritanical with regards to planning, right? Life isn't perfect. Life is not pure. We as humans, we're just not perfect beings. We're not pure beings, right? So if there's some part of you that feels like you need your art to be perfect or pure, or you need your process to be perfect or pure, or you need your planning to be perfect or pure, I invite you to really question where this idea is coming from. Is it true to you? Is it authentic to you? Or is it some other voice that you've internalized from an external source, perhaps from someone or something you've considered to be an authority at some point in your life? Maybe it's one of your primary caretakers, maybe it's a teacher, whoever that may be. Just be really questioning and discerning about this voice coming in and being like, there is a right way to do this, right? Which leads me to my next point, which is the idea of the truth of the work. Part of Tafi's question also makes me think about what makes a work true? What makes the process energetically true, right? This is not a trivial question. This is a huge question, and one that I believe is really worth contemplating for all of us. My sense is that the answer to this question rests on our personal definition and our personal experience of authenticity. How do you know when you're being true to yourself? How do you know when you're being true to your own creative inspiration and your own creative impulse, and to the ways that your own energy wants to authentically move through you? How do you know when the work is being born out of truth for you? It might be helpful to also explore the other side of the coin. How do you know when you're not being true to yourself, or your creative inspiration, or your own energetic flow? I believe that our experience of truth transcends words. And at the same time, when I experience myself in my own truth, I can just feel it. So perhaps you may want to start noticing what sensations are present for you when you're living in accordance to your own truth. What thoughts are present? Or perhaps what thoughts are not present? Because if you're like me, you might notice an absence of thoughts. And this experience of my thoughts being really grounded and harmonized with the rest of my being when I'm in my truth. There's a way in which my thoughts don't feel disconnected from the rest of my life and my aliveness and my body. I also think it's important to not orient towards locking down our definitions of truth, right? This is something that we can easily do. Like maybe we journal about some of these questions, right? Maybe we journal about the times when we feel true to ourselves and what sensations are present. And then we start to want to create a dictionary around it, and we want to be dogmatic about it, right? So let me explain a little bit more using an analogy. Rather than approaching the quest of sensing into the truth as if it's a tiger that we can tame and put in a cage, perhaps we can think about orienting towards the truth as if it's the aurora borealis or a shooting star. Rather than orienting towards wanting to lock down the truth when we find it, to define it in concrete terms, perhaps we can orient towards being available to listen to the truth when it's present in the room. In order for us to see the aurora borealis or to see the shooting star, our surroundings have to be dark enough for the faint glow of these celestial phenomena to be visible to us. And so likewise, perhaps the way to orient towards truth is to learn to be quiet enough and to be slow enough in our thoughts, in our actions, and in our deeds so that we can actually experience truth when it's present with us. So I'm going to leave you here with a mystery, with a riddle, rather than with answers. I want you to hold the original intent of the question that we began this exploration with, which is, how might we be able to use our planning skills in order to help us create work that feels authentic to us, that feels energetically true to us? And while you're holding that in your heart and in your being, I will be reading this passage from Rick Rubin's The Creative Act for us. Notice what comes up in your consciousness. Notice what pours out as a thought or as a reflection or a possible answer coming up and out from the depths of your being. To see what no human has seen before, to know what no human has known before, to create as no human has created before, it may be necessary to see as if through eyes that have never seen, know through a mind that has never thought, create with hands that have never been trained. This is beginner's mind, one of the most difficult states of being to dwell in for an artist, precisely because it involves letting go of what our experiences have taught us. Beginner's mind is starting from pure childlike place of not knowing, living in the moment with as few fixed beliefs as possible, seeing things for what they are as presented, tuning in to what enlivens us in the moment instead of what we think will work, and making our decisions accordingly. Any preconceived ideas and accepted conventions limit what's possible. Try to experience everything as if for the first time. If you grew up in a landlocked town that you never left, the first time you traveled and saw the ocean would likely be a dramatic, awe-inspiring experience. If you spent your whole life living near the ocean, your experience of it would almost certainly be less dramatic. When you see what's present around you as if for the first time, you start to realize how astonishing it all is. As artists, we aim to live in a way in which we see the extraordinary hidden in the seemingly mundane. Then challenge ourselves to share what we see in a way that allows others a glimpse of this remarkable beauty. Challenge ourselves to share what we see in a way that allows others a glimpse of this remarkable beauty. All right, that is all I have to share with you on this topic. I hope this was useful. I hope this gave you something to consider, something to facilitate your own deep knowing and your innate intelligence when it comes to having a relationship with planning that serves and that enlivens your creative practice as a human being, however that looks like. If this podcast episode serves you, I would love to receive your help in getting it out there. You can share it with members of your communities. You can share it on social media. You can leave ratings and reviews on Apple Podcast and on Spotify. For written reviews, even 2 sentences can be so helpful in getting this podcast to a wider audience. And yeah, I just really deeply appreciate your help in spreading the word so that this work can also benefit others. And in addition, I am available for working one-on-one throughout August and September. I use tools like astrology, divination, and the subtle alchemy of energy work, which are really powerful tools that can assist in the process of helping you remember who you are, and in the process of having more access to your authentic energy. You then naturally start to recover access to your own information. And oftentimes, in fact, 99% of the times, in my opinion and in my experience, this is what folks need. This is what I need when I go to some of my favorite practitioners. I simply need to remember who I am on a deep level so that I can know what to do next, because no one can really tell me. And I will never really tell you what to do next. But to me, remembering who we are is such a complex and nuanced and beautiful process that we innately know how to do. And yet sometimes it can be really helpful to have the help of another person. And yeah, working with folks one-on-one is really one of my deepest joys, and it feels like such a privilege to witness all of you, who have been working with me in your own process. And if it calls to you in August and September, I would absolutely love to see you. Thank you for being here. I hope you have a beautiful August. I hope this episode is helpful in your process this month, and I look forward to spending time again with you soon. I am sending you all so much love and blessings. Take care.